by the early 14th century, trade and diplomatic relation between Poland and Near East were formally established with well-defined commercial roads along which Constantinople, Lwów, Kamieniec-Podolski, Krakow, Toruń and Gdańsk, Danzig on the north of Poland were important stages. In the documentary sources from the 16th, 17th and 18th centuries preserved in Poland, very frequently are mentioned the Turkish and Persian silks, also in litters, probably for the production of the silk textile in Poland. Turkish textiles, Turkish dyes, for example, 1 stone of dyes in the stones. Turkish kerchiefs, velvet, atlas, atlas with gold, damask, cloth of gold, etc. From the first half of 15th century, very interesting silk textiles are as a part of chisables made of the end of the 17th century, are preserved in Krakow Diocesan Museum, once belonged to the Krakow Cathedral Church. One of them, with the Bishop Zbigniew Oleśnicki coat of arms, here you have this coat of arms, and called Dębno, that is Polish coat of arms, and with the crosses was made most possibly in Istanbul workshop on the beginning of 15th century. These chisables found Professor Norhan Atasoy and show me, they took my attention on it, and I have the possibility to publish later these chisables. That is very interesting. Here you have the pieces of this, and the second, with the Arabic inscriptions, was made most probably in Cyprus during Mamluk. And the next one, that is very interesting. You see, this is textile with Arabic inscription here, preserved in church in Krakow. And the next one, it is Antependium in Wawel Cathedral Treasury, made of the silk textiles, most probably also from Cyprus in the same period. I have no illustration, sorry. Those textiles were specially ordered and sent to Krakow. Generally, through for much of 15th and 16th centuries, Poland and Turkey were in peace. At that time, under the rule of the Jagiellonian dynasty, Poland was united with Lithuania, and her boundaries extended far to the east, close to Crimean Khanate and Ottoman Empire. It is in the period of the last Jagiellonian kings, Sigismund I and Sigismund II Augustus, there existed an agreement with Sublime Porte, under the term of which merchants acting on behalf of the rulers of both states were exempted from the taxes and tolls. Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent was sending merchants to Poland very frequently. Instance in the documentary sources, there are notice that in 1536 one of the Turkish merchants died in Vilna. In the inventory of goods left by him are listed many high-quality jewelry, textiles, sashes, weapons, etc. Polish-Turkish relations deteriorated at the end of the 16th century after Sigismund of the Swedish Vasa dynasty had been elected to the Polish throne. It is important to remark that Polish kings and nobility and magnates bringing to their residences art products from Turkey, hence a steady augmentation of the number of those who work in Poland. Thus, for instance, Stefan Batory, here you have the image of our king. King of Poland from 1576 sent the merchants to Turkey and ordered the carpets, I quoted, with the birds which in Turkey they are making frequently. You can see how our king is dressed after Turkish costume, of course, with the long sleeves and here.
Also the shoes.
Also the shoes and the cap, of course. The cap is difficult to see. It is only the one pieces of the carpet preserved in Poland in the National Museum in Krakow with not birds but with dragons design. But how it was popularity in Poland, this design with birds, it is we can learn after this picture. It is the painting on the wall in the one building in Tarnów, nearby Krakow, which shows us this carpet painted on the wall. That is very interesting. From the end of 16th century, beginning of 17th century. And also in the same building, preserved the painted carpet with Cintamani. That is very, very interesting. So when I found it, I was very, very happy. So the Turkish objects of art now in Polish museums and churches have been arriving to Poland for a very long period in various ways, as purchases, as a booty, as a diplomatic gifts, and finally during the 19th century being bought by the collectors to the private collections and later were deposited or given to the museums. The collections came into existence for very different reasons, and the objects were acquired in various ways. Some of those collections have been built up more systematically. For example, a part of Princess Izabela Czartoryska collection in Puławy now makes the Islamic collection in Princess Czartoryski Museum in Krakow. The Turkish collection consists of high-quality pieces, miniatures and manuscripts, stands, saddles, caparisons, weapons. Her collection was transformed into a private museum between 1801 and 1809. Then two specially designed buildings were erected in Puławy near Warsaw. The Islamic armor collection of Sefer Pasha Kościelecki in Krakow National Museum consists of very high quality pieces, mostly Turkish. Władysław Kościelecki later used the name Sefer Pasha. Kościelecki entered to service of Sultan Ahmed made in Istanbul, became master of ceremony at Sultan's court and assumed the name Sefer Pasha. The Turkish manuscripts in Polish collection preserved in Kurnik Palace Library as an example from Zamoyski family library, in Krakow National Museum as the part of the collection of Emeryk Hutem-Czapski Library, and of course in Princess Czartoryski Library in Krakow. The greatest part of those collections consists of manuscripts which were bought of their content, Holy Korans, biography of those who paved the way, or mystics of the Rumi Circle by Dervish Mahmud from the 17th century, bought by Sir Stratton in Istanbul for Stanisław Zamoyski before 1818. Genealogy of Turkish Sultan, yes, from the end of the 17th century, bought in Paris in 1803 by Stanisław Zamoyski. An outstanding collection of Turkish arms, military insignia and equipment are preserved in Poland museums, and ecclesiastic treasures originate from the wars between Turkey and Poland. Among them, pride of place must be given to the banners. 5 pieces are in Wawel Royal Castle in Krakow. two banners taken after Vienna in 1683 of Sulvicar type and inscriptional type, yes, captured at the Battle of Vienna by Marcin Zamoyski, were presented by John de Sobieski to the cathedral in Krakow and preserved now in Wawel Castle collection in Krakow, of course. In the same way, as a Vienna booty to the Polish collection came the Ottoman saddles caparison preserved in Krakow National Museum, in Princess Czartoryski collection and in Wawel Castle collection. One of them was taken by Hetman Mikołaj Hieronim Sieniawski. That is a very nice example. So you can read everything about on this that is written. Another that is very nice, and the next photo of this, and next, and the equipment, of course, is very nice. And the second is connected with Hetman Marcin Zamoyski. That is this. Also is caparison embroidered, Turkish caparison embroidered. Nice piece. And the next saddle, it was given by Sultan Mustafa II for Stanisław Małachowski in 1699, together with beautiful jade cups and spoon made in Turkey on the second half of 17th century. Stanisław Małachowski was a diplomat, and it was given to him. And we have also a very nice embroidered caparison in the collection of in the National Museum in Warsaw. It is not from Vienna, of course, but it was it must be given or bought. We don't know exactly, but it is important that it was used during in 1705 during the coronation ceremony of the Stanisław Leszczyński as a King of Poland in 1705. Yes, from the beginning of the 18th century. Sorry, it was about this caparison. The same is true of the tents now in Wawel Castle collection in Krakow and in National Museum in Krakow and in Princess Czartoryski collection in Krakow. Most of these tents are typically Turkish. Wawel Castle Museum in Krakow has 6 complete tents and several pieces of walls and roofs. Very interesting Turkish tent from the end of the 16th century, second half of 16th century, preserved, is stored in the collection of National Museum in Krakow. This tent is made of cotton canvas with silk and cotton decorations. Since the Battle of Żurawno upon Dniestr in 1676, this tent was noticed like a property of Stanisław Druszkiewicz family. We know everything about this tent, nearly everything. Colonel of the King John de Sobieski, and after in the possession of the Suwczyński family. In 1880, it was displayed at the time of visit of Emperor Franciscus Joseph I in Galicia, and it was displayed especially for this moment, for the resting of Emperor. emperor. And this tent have an inscription, of course, and it's very nice, was very nice, because this tent was displayed, decoration out,
inside out.
Inside out, yes, and and so that is why that is very bad preserved. Anyway, but it was very nice, very nice object. Decoration was in yellow silk and blue.
I think that is the oldest tent
yes.
we have.
Yes, really. That is very nice. And what is the shape? We can have to imagine from this picture. In Krakow, National Museum preserved also the second, but it is well known. It was a very simple design, 17th century tent, but very good example, of course. And the next is still problem, not still, because Professor Nurhan Atasoy told us that it is from 19th century, and it is true. And I would like to tell that it was displayed on the permanent exhibition in Czartoryski Museum in Krakow as a trophy from the Battle of Vienna. It's a magnificent. It was open tent of woolen cloth, which is traditionally connected with Grand Vizier Kara Mustafa. In fact, the canopy and wings and so it was a tradition and very it was repeated by many scholars till Professor Nurhan Atasoy and I tried to change this attribution, but Professor told it, and it was from 19th century, and any connection with Kara Mustafa and Vienna battle, and there's no. And we have a next example of tent. We found it in the. It is a funny situation because it was preserved in Diocesan Museum. Diocesan Museum means church museum. And this tent, the priest, the director of this museum, told us when we were there with Nurhan Atasoy, told us that he had something interesting, possibly tent from Vienna. And nobody knows about how, and Professor Nurhan looked at and told that is possibly from 18th century decoration. Yes,
even later.
Even later. Yes.
It is for the bride. You know?
Yes, for the bride. Yes, that is
baldachin.
Baldachin. Yes.
No.
So. We are going ahead, and here we have a real object. It is stirrup of the Grand Vizier Kara Mustafa, made before 1683 in Istanbul, possibly, with gilt bronze and engraving and turquoises. This stirrup was allegedly lost by the Grand Vizier Kara Mustafa after Vienna battle. 3 Poles who served in the Ottoman armies supposedly brought it to John the III Sobieski, who sent it via his courtier and artilleryman Philip Dupont to Queen Mary Kazimiera in Krakow, along with news of the Vienna victory. That is very important things now preserved in Wawel Castle collection. And we have the stirrups, normal stirrups. This pair of Turkish stirrups from 18th century preserved in Tarnów Museum. It's from private property, of course, and and that is awesome. To the booty belonging also Kaukan shield. Oh, that's very nice object. Assumed with Stefan Czarnecki, made in Turkey in 17th century, now in Princess Czartoryski collection, foundation, made with rattan, gold, silver and steel wire, silver, gilt, jasper, turquoises, rubies, emeralds, wood and gold. Probably among the trophies brought from Vienna by the hetman Mikołaj Hieronim Sieniawski, close collaborator of King III Sobieski, is the shield listed in the first inventory of the Temple of Sibyl in Puławy, belongs to Izabela Czartoryska, now in Krakow, Princess Czartoryski collection. Sieniawski took part in all the king's campaigns. He died of the plague shortly after the victory at Vienna. So that is that true that it is the Vienna booty. And we have the special problem with Carabella sabre, Carabella type sabre, because it was very frequently made in Lvov, in Armenian workshops, which were put together, partly Turkish and partly Polish pieces. And this Carabella was made in Krakow, in Lvov, with Turkish blade during the 17th century and first half of the 18th century, which was added the new part. This Carabella sabre made with Damascus steel, silver, chalcedony, wood, leather, velvet and Morocco leather, yellow engraved, gilded and inlaid, was preserved in National Museum in Krakow. The next Carabella sabre with Turkish blade made of Damascus steel, an inscription in Polish was added here on this blade, probably during the 19th century after Poland was partitioned. And there is there is the popular call for fight for independence, Dobronik, it's in Polish language, of course. So that is the same. And the next is this Polish hussar sabre made in Lvov and blade made in Turkey, of course. Oh, sorry. Here. Yes, blade made in Turkey. During the late 17th century, made with steel, silver plate, wood and leather, of course, and preserved in National Museum in Krakow, adopted to the Polish style of facing, undoubtedly contributed to the sudden increase in popularity of the sabre in Western Europe. The next Polish, that is this, and the next Polish hussar sabre has the decoration with excellent example of Turkish influence. The inscription on the blade is in Polish, Jesus Maria Joseph, Deus spes mea, and Latin, and the structure of the hilt indicated that it is Polish made, of course, under Turkish influence. So, of course, the similar situation is with horse track preserved in museum in Tarn. Also Turkish pieces here and possibly made in above as a whole. And we have also a very nice object, very well-known object, the egret, yes, egret, which is was designed to adorn the Hungarian type helmet derived from Turkish models, a reflection of the growing influence of Turkish culture that reached Central Europe through the Alps. And in Poland, the fashion for having numerous Eastern carpets, now we will be about carpets, in the greater part Turkish carpets for the decoration of the palaces and manor houses was very important for noblemen, especially in the Baroque period. This feature, in the connection with the different ideological and political foundations, created the special Polish Baroque style called Sarmatian, and it is another subject. But Turkish carpets were popular in Poland from Middle Ages. Today we only have testimony of this unusual richness of carpets in the archival records, which usually mention several dozen pieces with the property of one owner. Carpets being for Poles object of luxury, added to the splendor of the noblemen's houses' interior decoration. There were many reasons of popularity of Eastern carpets in Poland. Those textiles reached our country as was goods by means of trade or were bought as a precious diplomatic gifts. For example, the Turkish legate who came to Krakow in 1492 brought gifts carried by 12 camels. Notes in Krakow customs books often tell about the dozen of Turkish carpets brought by particular merchants. In 1553, King Sigismund II asked his legate to Turkey, Wawrzyniec Zbytko-Jordan, to bring 162 carpets to decorate the rooms at the Wawel Castle on the occasion of wedding with Catherine of Austria Habsburg. In 1585, King Stefan Batory, with the help of Armenian living in Lvov, ordered 26 carpets in red, blue with yellow, and white with red, with bird pattern, how I mentioned before. Stefan Batory must have particularly liked these rugs with such a design. In modern times, the interest in this tradition was expressed in private collection of art lovers. Some of them, particularly in Krakow and Lvov, collected rugs in 19th century. Greater collection of carpets in Krakow were those of Erasm Baranch and Felix Jasiński, the collector of Erasm Baranch, comprising 25 textiles and deposit in the Krakow National Museum in 1914 and passed to the property of the museum in 1922. Felix Jasiński, a traveler and an outstanding collector and connoisseur of the East, Curator of Krakow National Museum, bequeathed his collection consisting of several dozen textiles as early as 1903. The collection mentioned above created the foundation of the carpet collection in the textile department in Krakow National Museum, in Wawel Castle in Krakow, in Warszawa National Museum, and in Tatra Museum in Zakopane. Also carpets were preserved. The most interesting carpet preserved in Krakow National Museum primarily was a property of Corpus Christi Church in Krakow. It was probably donated, this one, to the church by Hetman Jan Stanisław Zamoyski, a participant of the Vienna battle in 1683, after his safe coming back, made with yellow wool warp and claret wool deft and senna knots. That is interesting that it is senna knots. The dimensions are long, 10 meter long, 10 meter long and 4 meter wide. The claret field is covered by small chintamani, gold-colored motifs in net-like arrangement. Its weaving technique with senna knots, motifs and colors are characteristic of Cairo looms production about the middle of the 16th century. So it was impossible to make the photo of a whole carpet, so I have only example of the part of them, but you can imagine how it was fantastic. 10 meters long, yes, and 4 meters wide. And once more. So of course the state of preserve is not so good, and anyway, because it's it's from 16th century. What is most possible? Yes, and it was used in the church. Of course, before. And it is very possible that in similar way come to Krakow churches another Turkish carpet made in uszak, a typical uszak, of course, in the 17th century, now preserved. This is preserved in National Museum in Krakow. I have no pictures, but I would like to tell you that 2 uszak carpets preserved in Babel Castle collection. One of them described as uszak, and the second with the Polish coat of arms, described as Polish manufacturer. Uszak preserved in the preserved in the collection of Krakow National Museum, acquired from Krakow churches on the end of 19th century, are very similar with this described as made in Poland. So, as you will see, there cannot be found in indisputable features neither technical nor stylistic, indicating that the uszak with the coat of arms was executed in Poland. Rather, it was ordered in Turkey, of course, and the coat of and the design of coat of arm were sent to Turkey as this coat of arm of Dębno, as you can see, as we saw on the beginning. In Krakow National Museum preserves the set of 10 of so-called Transylvanian carpets. Of course, we have this one, the most interesting one in this group. In our collection is the carpet with scarcely occurring white background, against which a pattern in red with the addition of sky blue and yellow is outlined. These carpets were donated to the museum by Erasm Baronch and Felix Jasieński, what I mentioned before. This type of carpets were very frequently painted, not very, but frequently painted as a decoration of the interiors. This is painting from the end of 17th century in cloister in the south of Poland, in Rzeszów. That is very interesting. The table in this liturgical situation was covered by Transylvanian, so-called Transylvanian carpet. And in the second paintings also, and this is also, but it is the later paintings from 18th century preserved also in the church on the south of Poland. Yes, and you have here, yes, everything, the border of so-called. And we have also preserved in Krakow nunnery embroidered so-called Transylvanian carpet. That is interesting, that the nunnery during 18th century embroidered the carpet like this, because they like it. In the National Museum collection of course, carpets, Ladik carpets, also the Slavic type carpets, also we can find on the paintings in Poland. This is the votive picture. This Ladik carpet is on the behind the altar. You can see how it was used. That is interesting. And another Ladik and Jordes and Curator, of course, and Bergama carpet, and many others we have. In Poland, the using of a silk Turkish and Persian sashes. Now, sorry, that is the last one carpet, and now about sashes, very shortly, was very popular from 16th century. From this period, the notice about sashes onwards entered more and more frequently in the Polish inventories of clothing. In Lvov, archival sources noticed a large number of silk sashes which passed through the warehouse of the Armenian living in the city, often made or purchased in Bursa. For instance, an Armenian merchant in Lvov ordered 340 sashes from his agent in Istanbul. Even more Turkish sashes were imported in the second half of 17th century. The inventory of King John III personal belongings, drawn up in 1673, listed Turkish sashes to 1 each. Turkish ones that used to be worn together with Polish dress before the home production of Oriental-style textile developed. Thus, in this natural way, Eastern sashes became models for the production of the first Polish sashes workshop. So I show only the Turkish sashes made in Istanbul, of course, in Armenian workshop, and how it was used together with Polish costume. You can see typical Polish costume from 18th century. It belonged to John Potocki. It is from 1773. You can see from the front and from the back, and with the sash, of course. That is the custom to use this sash. The sash is like this. And the typical Polish costume from 19th century, also with sash. So, and it is a well-known fact that the Islamic textiles were very popular in Poland, and the owners were proud of them. In the palaces and manor houses were being used, for example, I quoted, big Turkish hanging in crimson with gold, crimson curtain made in Turkish textile with gold and green flowers, consist of 7 bands. The hangings around the bed made of the same Turkish textiles. So we, in our museum, preserved the example like this, Turkish hangings like this from 17th century. Many Islamic textiles were private property and found their way to the church's treasures as donation and gifts. For that reason, in church's property there are many liturgical vestments, chisables and copes, dalmatics made with beautiful Islamic textiles. For example, in St. Mary Church in Krakow preserved 4 chisables made of Persian and Turkish textiles from the 17th century, as well as in the other Krakow and provincial churches. This is chisable preserved in the little church on the south of Poland in Kościelec Pińczowski. It is nearby Krakow. It is made with fantastic Turkish velvet, brocaded, silk and gold brocaded, and it was made sorry, with hand, from hanging, yes, with hanging. The part of this hanging preserved in the National Museum, the pieces of, another pieces of this hanging, preserved in the National Museum. As you can see, here is the line of the border, yes? You can find it here. So, that is how it was popular to use this textile. The vases, jugs, casket, bowls, pen boxes, evers, lamp are preserved in National Museum in Krakow, in National Museum in Warsaw, in District Museum in Bielsko-Biała, in the Tarnów Museum, and cloister as well, and churches. So it is the end of my lecture, and if you have a time, I have another cushion card, cushion yastiks. Yes, we have a very good yastiks collection. It is I finished my lecture, but I would like to show you this beautiful and fantastic hangings preserved in nunnery in Krakow. Very huge, fantastic, from 18th century. Yes. And I went quickly. That is all. Thank you so much. And if you have any questions,